Good morning. My name is Thomas Alva Edison, and I'm here to talk to you today about a very special celebration, a birthday. But speaking of birthdays, I wonder if you could show me by raising your hand how many of you are 10 years old? A lot of you. Put your hands down, please. How many of you are 9 years old or younger? All right. And how many are 11 years old or older? Teachers, that includes you. And how many of you have a birthday in the month of October? Oh, okay, not quite so many. Well, thank you very much. Today I'm here to talk to you not about somebody's birthday, but instead about the birthday of something that's in your home and you use it every day. And I'll bet you know what it is.
Light bulb.
The light bulb. However, my question is not what birthday are we discussing, but I wonder how good your math skills are. The light bulb this year is a certain number of years old, and I wonder if you know how old it is. I'll take a couple of guesses. What do you think? 125? What do you think? I'm sorry, what? That's what you're going to say? Anyone going to say something different? Okay, actually the answer is 125. I think your teachers have prepared you with that information, and maybe you've been reading the newspaper. Well, knowing that the light bulb is 125 years old and that this is the year 2004, I wonder how good your math skills are. And so I wonder if you could do the math in your mind to figure out in what year the light bulb was invented. Raise your hand and I'll take a couple of guesses. What do you think?
1908.
No? What do you think?
1909.
Okay, that's a guess. What do you think? 1995, what do you think?
16.
You're the closest so far. One more guess.
1775.
No, she was really close with 18 something.
1700.
No, the answer is 1879. But I would like to compliment you on thinking so hard about that problem, and I'd like to compliment your teachers too for two things. One, for preparing you to be thinking about Thomas Edison and the things that you might know about me, and also for the very polite way you came into the room and sat quietly waiting for us to get started. Thank you so much, teachers and students, for that wonderful entry. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about several things from my life, but there are two words that I'm going to use pretty frequently. One of them is the word discover, and one is the word invent. Now, although they're often used together, they really don't mean the same thing. Discover means to suddenly become aware of something that's been there all along. To invent means to create something new that never existed before. Now, lightning has been around for thousands of years. I'm sorry, electricity has been around for thousands of years because you can see it in the lightning that I just mentioned as it arcs through the sky. You can also feel electricity if you were to walk across a carpeting and then touch someone else or touch something metal, and you might get a shock. You can even see and feel electricity if you rub a balloon against your hair, and the static electricity will make it stick to a wall. The balloon, I mean, not your hair. You might even see and feel some electricity if you were to pet a cat in a dark room and rub the fur backwards. And you might see little sparks fly off, but I would encourage you not to do that because I also discovered that cats don't like it. Now, electricity was discovered before my time and even used, but not for electric lights. So I wanted to invent an electric light because I thought it would be a better way to light our homes than using candles and kerosene lamps and gas lamps. You see, these things were not very favorable because they gave off smoke and fumes. They smelled bad, and they were also very dangerous. If you left them burning unattended, or if you left them burning too long, or if you accidentally knocked one over, you could start a tremendous fire and perhaps burn your house down. So I felt sure there was some way to make a safer light by using electricity. And I wondered a great deal about that and thought about it a lot. I have another question for you. Have you ever experienced a power outage or a blackout? Raise your hand. I knew that would be the case because I heard a couple of years ago there was a big power outage in this area. You probably discovered that all of the things that run on electricity suddenly no longer work when the power is out. As a matter of fact, you may have used candles or flashlights in your own home to light your way after dark, unless you had your own generator, which enabled you to run some of your electrical appliances. You probably even flicked the switch a couple of times to see if the light might come back on, or forgot that the power was out and realized it when the appliances wouldn't work. And you probably came to a whole new discovery as well, how many things there are in your home that run on electricity. I talked with a few people in the area and found out that these are some of the marvelous inventions that you have in your home that run on electricity. And I'm sure there are many more, but these are the ones that I wrote down on my tablet. Stoves and televisions and microwaves and freezers and VCRs and furnaces, power tools, hair dryers, AC. What is AC? Go ahead. Air conditioning, right. Coffee pots, garbage disposal, garage door opener. That one strikes me funny because I can imagine when the power is out, if you can't get the garage door up, you can't get the car out and go anywhere unless you disengage the opener. What strikes me as funny is we didn't even have garages in my day. So, when you were talking about the fact that all of these things didn't work in your homes, you might also stop and think about the fact that when the power goes out, there are other places that are affected by that as well. Places like restaurants and businesses and hospitals and schools. All of these places also have other electrical devices that no longer work when the power goes out unless they use a generator. Even the city itself experiences a problem when the lights go out or when the power goes out because the street lights, the stop lights no longer work, the big advertising signs that light up the night, none of those things work. And so what you probably discovered was when the sun went down, it was pretty dark indeed when there were no lights running anywhere. Well, that's what it was like every day when I was a boy of 10 or 12. You see, we didn't have electricity running through our homes, and we didn't have any of the gadgets that you have and you enjoy in your homes whatsoever. And I wondered an awful lot about the things that might take place. You see, I was a very curious lad, and I was constantly thinking of things and wondering how things might be different. Let me tell you just a little bit about myself. I was born in Milan, Ohio, in 1847, over 150 years ago. I wasn't born in Port Huron. Milan, Ohio is about, a few hours away from here by today's transportation, but back then it seemed so very far. My family lived in Milan until I was 7 years old. And at that time the railroad was built, but it went around Milan and not through it, and it became very difficult for my family to earn a living. So my parents decided that they needed to move somewhere else to make a living, and they chose to come to Port Huron, Michigan in the spring of 1854. Well, we couldn't just load up everything in the car and drive here because, well, one, there were no cars, and two, there were no highways. All we had were horse and buggy, and we could just basically follow trails and paths or a general route to get someplace, and it would have taken an awfully long time. So instead, my family loaded up our belongings on a train and took the railroad from Milan to Detroit, and then transferred our things to a steamboat and came by steamboat up the St. Clair River to Port Huron. Shortly after we arrived, my father, mother, my siblings, brothers and sisters, and I became very ill with a serious sickness called scarlet fever. And I was sick almost all summer. Fortunately, I was better in time to go to school in the fall. But unfortunately, I was not a very good student. You see, I couldn't pay attention in class. I had a terrible time focusing on what was going on because I had so many ideas and so many thoughts running through my own mind, so many questions about what if. I practically drove my parents and my teacher crazy by asking all of those questions because they weren't the kind of questions normal people asked. I would ask things like, why do clouds float in the sky? How do birds fly? What happens to words once they've been spoken? Now, because I was always caught up in my own thoughts and wondering about what if, people thought my behavior was pretty odd. And I guess I'd have to say they were probably right. I did do some pretty strange things. Why, I remember once as a boy, I thought that I could hatch some goose and hen eggs if I sat on them the way the mother did. And so I gathered some eggs together and I tried. Let me tell you, it didn't work. Don't try it yourself. It was pretty messy. I also wondered what would happen one day if I dangled a fishing line with a worm on it out the second-story window of my school. I did catch something, you know what? A chicken. And I reeled him all the way up into the room, and the chicken was squawking, bah, 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 making all kinds of noises, disturbing the class and angering the teacher quite a bit. My ideas were not only followed through at school. I remember the time I experimented with fire in my family's barn. I burned it to the ground. I got a public whipping for that one. Well, anyway, back to school. I was often punished a lot in school as well because I didn't pay attention and I asked way too many questions, and the teacher thought I was addled. Do you know what addled means? What do you think?
That's, like, kind of different from
Oh, it's even worse than that. Go ahead.
it means like, crazy.
Yeah, kind of crazy and stupid, like I just couldn't learn. And my teacher became very frustrated because I kept asking questions, interrupting the class, not paying attention, and finally he decided that I was a troublemaker. So after only about 3 months, my teacher sent me home from school for good. My mother, who was a former teacher, undertook teaching me to read and write, and my father encouraged me to learn all that I could from great books. As a matter of fact, my father gave me 25 cents for every book I read. Now that might not sound like a lot of money to you in exchange for reading a whole book, but back then in the 1800s, 25 cents was quite a bit of money. My father also encouraged me in my learning and allowed me to set up a laboratory in the cellar of our home where I could conduct some of my experiments. And I went down there and tested out all of my ideas, and I even labeled everything in the basement with the word poison so that everyone else would stay away from it. Now, my parents were very supportive of me and encouraged me to learn and try things. Matter of fact, they would have to be, and they'd have to be pretty forgiving, because one day I brought a hollow log into the basement and filled it with explosives and blew it up. I shook the whole house, and my father thought I was going to bring the whole house down on the family. I even tried to build a steam engine in the basement. You know, I could have been a really good Boy Scout back then and earned a lot of badges for all the things that I tried, but we didn't have Boy Scouts back then either. When I was 11, I planted a garden at the side of our house where I raised vegetables. And these I sold so that I could buy the things that I needed for my laboratory. Most of the time in the winter, I was very sick. I was sick all the time as a child, but I always somehow managed to recover. But one side effect, and my mother thinks it came from the scarlet fever, is that I went deaf in one ear and became very hard of hearing. However, I could always hear the train whistle. In 1859, the Grand Trunk Railroad opened a line from Port Huron to Detroit, and I became the candy butcher on that train. The candy butcher doesn't sound like a very nice job, but this is basically what I did. I rode the train from Port Huron to Detroit every day and then rode the train back and sold things to the passengers, things like fruits and vegetables and candy and sandwiches and newspapers. And newspapers looked pretty much like this. They were printed on brownish paper in very small type, kind of hard to read. But you have to remember, I had a captive audience because there were no rest stops along the way. There were no fast food restaurants. There were no CD players that you could listen to entertain yourself, and no handheld video games so that you could occupy yourself. About the only thing there was to do on the train as it was traveling was to eat something or read something. I was 12 then, and I rode the train every day to Detroit in the morning and then rode back in the evening selling my wares. Now, can you imagine your mother and father letting you do that in a year from now or two? It's a different world today than it was then. When I was 14, the train company allowed me to set up a laboratory in one of the baggage cars. And that was great because then I could not only sell my wares and be the candy butcher, but I could also conduct some of my experiments. Until there was an explosion and I set the baggage car on fire and they threw all my things off the train, all except for my printing press. And they allowed me to print my own newspaper, the Weekly Herald, in the baggage car of the train. And I sold that to the people on the train. We also had a tie-over in Mount Clemens. Do you know where Mount Clemens is? You know, it's not real far from here, but between here and Detroit. And the train would stop there for a short while so that people could get out and stretch their limbs, take on new passengers. And I had an opportunity to take lessons in telegraphy. And this is operating a telegraph machine. Now, you probably have not seen a telegraph machine unless you've been to the museum, but it was a very fascinating early communications device, not a telephone, but an electromagnetic machine that you could tap on at one end. The impulses would travel through a wire and come out at the other end over great distances. And it sounded something like tap, 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 clickety, click, 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 clickety, click, click, click. And all of those taps and clicks were represented by dashes and dots, which is Morse code. The person at the other end listened to all of those things and jotted down the message that was coming through. And that's how you could communicate in the very beginning over great distances. I also had a long tie over in Detroit where I got a library card, and I spent a lot of my time reading. As a matter of fact, I read every book in the Detroit Public Library. Every book. My father was happy he was no longer paying me a quarter for every book I read at that point. I also used the skills that I learned in telegraphy to build my own telegraph system to my friend's house so that I could send him the news every day when I got back from Detroit. The next summer, I got a job in a jewelry store in Port Huron as the telegrapher, and I worked for the jewelry store sending out the messages that they needed sent. When I was 17, I left that job for a similar job with Grand Trunk Railroad over in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, as a telegrapher. And I started traveling a great deal. I loved to travel and discover new things and see what the world held. As a matter of fact, 3 years after that, I decided to go to Brazil. Do you know where Brazil is? South America. But I didn't go. Instead, I returned to Port Huron, broke and hungry. And while I was here, I helped to repair a broken communications cable that ran from Port Huron across the river to Sarnia. You see, back then, the two cities communicated with each other through telegraph messages. But when the cable was out, you'd think they couldn't communicate anymore, but we found a way. Instead of the telegraph, until it was repaired, we sent Morse code messages back and forth using the train whistle. So instead of clickety click 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 click, it was toot 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 on the train whistle. You can imagine how much the neighbors and you would have enjoyed living in the area when we were sending messages across the river. As I mentioned earlier, I was always thinking about things, coming up with new ideas, and trying to improve on things. When I was 21 years old, I invented the first electrical vote recorder. Now that's something that you might think about this year because I understand there's a presidential election coming up. But my invention was nothing like all the wonderful inventions now that will record people's votes. I also perfected the universal stock ticker. And this was a machine that investors on Wall Street used to tell what the prices of the stocks were. For that invention, I received $40,000. Now, $40,000 might sound like a lot to you today, but back then it was a fortune. It was a lot of money. So in 1869, I opened my own manufacturing shop in New Jersey, where I began to work on other inventions and try to create new things. I helped perfect the first typewriter. Do you know what a typewriter is? Because many of you only know the keyboard on the computer. Typewriter was a really fascinating device. You hit a key, a metal thing flies up and leaves the letter on the paper. Helped to invent that, and I invented some other things that work with telegraphy, and one very strange thing at the time, but you use it often in your homes, waxed paper. I also married my sweetheart, Mary Stillwell, on Christmas Day, 1871. But I went to the lab and worked on the day of my wedding. Mary was very understanding, though, and we had 3 children together. As a matter of fact, I even nicknamed my first 2 children Dot and Dash after the symbols used in Morse code. Unfortunately, Mary only lived for 13 years longer, and she died in 1884 of typhoid fever. And I missed her so much, and I really missed having a companion, that 2 years later, I married another beautiful young lady named Mina Miller. And together, she and I had 3 children, but I didn't nickname any of them. At 27, I discovered electric waves in free space, and this was very important for transmitters and radio and TV broadcasts. Other inventions included the Mimeo machine. Teachers, you might remember, especially teachers who have been here for a little while, the old Mimeo machine where you turned a crank and a drum turned and fluids flowed and ink pressed onto paper and it smelled bad. Nowadays you have this wonderful invention called the copier. Hit a button and it's done for you. And we also worked on transmitters for the telephone, microphones for the radio, and more. But my favorite invention of all, would you like to guess what it is? No. My favorite invention was the phonograph. Did you read the newspaper this morning? Okay. Favorite invention of all was the phonograph. The phonograph was a very unique device that enabled us to record voices and sounds on a wax cylinder, kind of like a tube. And it would turn and we could record things in the wax and then play them back later. Now, back in my day, that was a wonderful invention and it was a great success and it was a wonderful start to things to come, even though what you heard was very scratchy and gravelly. In 1878, I created the Edison Electric Company and started working on the first incandescent lamp. I had over 3,000 different ideas that I wanted to use for lights, and I wasn't sure what was going to work best. But I did know that I did not want to give up. I wanted to create the electric light so that there would be no more candles and kerosene lamps in our homes, and instead we'd fill the darkness with electric light. Some of the ideas that I came up with looked like this. And I tried to find a way that I could make the filament glow. Before that could happen, though, I had to improve the generators that distributed electricity for lights, power, and heat. And before that could happen, I had to do something else. I had to invent sockets, switches, and fuses. They didn't exist before then. In 1879, I started working on the light, and this was a real challenge. But I did discover that electricity flowing through a filament would cause it to glow and give off light. The problem was, I couldn't find anything that would work as the filament. Everything burned up very quickly because electricity was passing through it. I tried wire and weeds, I tried metal and thread, I tried bamboo, even human hair. But I finally found that the thing that worked best was thread, sewing thread, coated with carbon. And this is what I found. The two light bulbs on either side were very similar. These are replicas of the original light bulbs that I invented. And notice how the light flickers back and forth. That's because the filament wasn't very stable inside, and the very first light bulb is not what you use today. Over the years, light bulbs have been perfected over and over and over again. The center light bulb gives you a little bit better idea of how the filament works. The electricity comes through the filament and it starts to glow, and you can see it in this light bulb better than the ones at home because yours at home are often frosted glass so that you can't see inside. We had a really good question the other day. Someone said, I thought it was the incandescent lamp and not the light bulb. Well, the common name is really the light bulb because the glass looks like a bulb and the filament gives off light, and hence the light bulb. It's a lot easier than writing, pick up 2 incandescent lamps on your shopping list. From that time on, it was a turning point for us all. For 125 years, we have been able to live and learn and work and play without the shadows of darkness stopping us. One by one, more electronic devices were invented over the years, and some of the things that were invented back then were improved by other inventors. For example, do you remember what I said my favorite invention was? The phonograph. Well, the phonograph gave way to the record player. Any of you know what a record player is? Okay, that's more recent than I thought. And the record player gave way to 8-track tape players. And the 8-track tape player gave way to the cassette player. And then someone decided it'd be nice to carry that with you, and they invented the Walkman. And then came the CD player, and now I understand there's a device called an iPod that's connected to computers. Okay, so there are lots of advances coming along. I also invented the first motion picture camera. Now, this was a very early start, and my first movie was called The Sneeze. And this is basically what you saw. Achoo! And that was the whole movie. Series of still pictures run in sequence so that someone watching could see the magic of moving pictures. This had never been done before. Now, granted, that wasn't a very good movie. No one would pay to see it, and it would never win an award. But nowadays, because it's been perfected over the years, you can enjoy multi-million-dollar movies in the theater and even on televisions in your own home. I invented alkaline batteries back then, really large batteries for use in mining and railroads. And nowadays you have little teeny batteries that you can put into your small electric appliances at home, your clocks, even your toys. And I'll bet all of you know how to change the batteries in some of those devices. If you have a Walkman or a CD player, you know how to pull them out and put them back in. I invented the first electric passenger train. Way back then. That was a hugely novel idea because people had always traveled by steam engine where we burned coal and wood to heat the engine. If you've ever seen Back to the Future, that train was a steam and a coal burning train. That's how people traveled, and all that smoke and soot came out. Well, I invented the first electric train, and nowadays you have cars, I hear, called hybrids that run on both gasoline and electric batteries. I also invented a thing called a cement mixer. It was very unique at my time, but now I understand they're on trucks and they come right to the building site and dump the cement. I even invented a few medical testing devices, and nowadays you have X-rays and MRIs and CAT scans. So the point that I'd like to make is that things continue to improve. And over the years, I was issued 1,093 patents for successful inventions, and 356 of them were in electric lights. But it's important for you to realize that if I had 1,093 things that worked, I had a great deal more that didn't. I even received the Congressional Medal of Honor in 1928 for my work. I was often quoted as saying, "I'm long on ideas and short on time." I wished I had lived longer so that I could have invented more things. I had so many thoughts running around in my mind. But here's the thought. If I was able to do all of these things back in my day without the advantage of all the wonderful inventions that you have that make living and learning so much better now, just think what you might be able to do. Who knows, one of you here might be the person who makes the next discovery or invention that unlocks the door to a whole new future. I wonder what that would be. We'll just have to wait and see. But in the meantime, I want to encourage you to keep learning. Don't be like me. Pay attention in school. Ask good questions of your teacher, and realize that back then we didn't have all the advantages of school that you have. I see you even have a computer lab right here where you can work on the computer. Am I right? Okay. So you have plenty of opportunities, and you have teachers who are trained specifically in certain areas so they can help you achieve your best. And remember, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Always work to do better. Never let a failure stop you. I had many failures in my life, but I had 1,093 successes, fewer than the number of failures, that allowed me to contribute to society. I want to tell you my favorite quote of all, and that is, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." Do you know what that means? Here's what it means in good old words. Being considered really smart is 1% great idea and 99% hard work. So if you're willing to have a good idea and work really hard and never give up, you too can accomplish something like that, whatever you set your mind to. And you might create the next thing that takes us into the future. In the meantime, I would encourage you to remember that the more to do, the more done. The more things you try, the more that you'll accomplish. And above all, I encourage you to keep thinking and learning, and never, never, ever let these lights go out, the lights in your mind. If you would like to learn more about Thomas Edison, you can go to the Edison Museum at the base of the Blue Water Bridge by the Edison Inn and take a tour. And if you're there, you can try to turn a crank on a hand generator and light up a small model city. You can see one of the largest light bulbs I've ever even seen. It's about the size of me, I think. And you can see a model of the phonograph. Teachers, if you'd like to take a class there, you can have a class trip and even do the Wizard Workshop. In the meantime, if you have any questions for Thomas Edison, I'd be glad to try to answer them for you. However, I can't take stories and I can't take things that you need to tell about what you did. We only have time for 5 questions. 5 questions. Question number 1. I would imagine that probably some of my thinking started with that because I was aware of the fact that electricity caused things to light up from sparks or from the lightning in the sky. And I knew that electricity could power things, and so I thought and thought and thought that if I could channel electricity somehow into an appliance, I should be able to create an electric light. So I'm sure that down the road, things that happened before me prompted some of my ideas, even though I might not have realized it at the time. That's the wonderful thing about life. All of your experiences can help you come up with new ideas and new inventions. Question number 2.
How did you make a TV?
I didn't make a television. That came many years later. The motion picture I invented, and I had a camera, and I put all of my single pictures together and ran them quickly, and that's what came out looking like a movie. Question number 3.
How did you get the light set of the light bulb?
Oh, that's a good question, and I'm glad you asked that because there's something that I need to say to you. The filament inside the light bulb is inside this glass bulb because glass does not conduct electricity. So it's housed inside here to keep it safe. I can touch the glass and I won't get a shock. However, if you ever experiment or investigate light, do not, please do not ever touch the metal part at the bottom while the light is on or while it's plugged in, because you will get a very bad shock and it will hurt tremendously and it might cause some serious damage. Electricity is not something to mess around with, and I was a very lucky boy that I didn't get hurt badly myself. However, you can see how the light bulb works, and it came inside the glass houses it. It also has a vacuum so that it allows the filament to burn longer. We discovered that as well, that it burned longer and it kept it in place. And it allows you then to touch the light, although it might get hot, so don't burn yourself when you touch it. When you're home, if you want to ask your parents to give you a light bulb to examine, especially one that's burned out, you can shake it against your ear, and usually when a light bulb burns out, it's because the filament has now broken inside, and you can hear it rattle. Normally, if it's a good light bulb, it doesn't rattle. But you can also see if there's a clear glass bulb somewhere that you can look at the filament when it's not lit, and you can see 2 prongs, usually, with a little wire going across, probably kind of like this, but not that squiggly. More like this, really, 2 prongs coming up with a little wire, and that's what lights up. The electricity goes through the filament and gives off light. Question number 4. Can you pull your feet back, please?
Or something on the bus.
On the train.
And when you got the money, where did it go to?
It went to buy things for my laboratory, and it was my money. I had to buy the things that I sold, so I had to create the profit margin, if you will, pay for what I bought, and then sell what I bought to other people, and then any extra money was mine to keep, and then I used that to buy the goods for my laboratory, like chemicals and things, so I could conduct experiments. Question number 5.
Did you make any experiment with the hydroglyphin, nutriglyphin, and that stuff?
Hydroglycerin, help me out. Nitroglycerin, thank you. Well, probably, but I didn't identify it as such at that time. I was just mixing chemicals together that I knew would cause an explosion to see what would happen. So even though I didn't create any bombs or anything, I did cause some things to blow up, like that log in my cellar. And I learned how dangerous that could be, even though I continued to try and had an explosion on the train even. So yeah, I would not encourage you to do that either. Nowadays, that could be a very dangerous thing to do. I'd like to thank you for being an excellent audience. Thank you so much for listening. I will tell you one thing. I'm not the real Thomas Edison. I'm sure you know that, because if I were, how old would I be? 157 years old. But instead, I will tell you that you may have seen me at your school before, because I'm Mr. Kraft and I work for the school district. I do the television shows with CPHS 6, and I observe your art and music classes. I normally have dark brown hair and a mustache. Yes, question from a teacher. You just asked one.
Do you know who invented the electrical current?
I would believe it was somebody named Ohm.
Well, you're close.
Okay, or Watt, or Volt.
Actually,
What?
who is it? Did you find out?
The electrical current?
It's Tesla.
Oh, Tesla, I did know that. Yeah. I can't hear because I'm hard of hearing and deaf in one ear. Wait a minute, what?
Did your teacher ever admit that she was wrong about you?
Oh, probably down the road when I became a real genius, she had the opportunity to say, yes, and he was one of my
But
students.
she never admitted that she was wrong?
I don't know. I didn't care later on in life. I was so busy working in my lab.
Well, she should have.
She should have. I had too many things, too many questions in my mind to care about what my teacher thought afterwards. If you were my teacher, would you have bragged about me later?
I would have said I was very wrong about you. Of course, I don't think I would have called you Adel.
You would have worked harder to win me over, right?
I think you would have been just just fine in my class.
Thank you very much. Thank you, boys and girls, very much for listening. Oh, one other thing. Remember, Thomas Edison read all the books in the library. He also kept a journal where he jotted down the things that were important to him. This is a wonderful thing to do. This is a blank book that I got. And I just put in here some of the notes because talking for 25 minutes is a long thing to do. So I jotted a few notes in here to trigger my memory to remember everything that I wanted to say to you. But keep a journal if you'd like so that you can remember things down the road. And also, teachers, we have bookmarks for you to distribute to the kids when you get back to your classes. Okay? Thank you very much.